Nitin Bhai.
Okay.
Okay, it's on, so you can talk.
Thank you. Namaste. My name is Nitin Soda. I hope you can all hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And I will host this Oxford Center of Hindu Studies, or OCHS talk, along with Raj Chauhan. This talk and others to follow each month have been organized by the Friends of OCHS, which is an amalgamation of the Leicester, Birmingham, Coventry, and Wellingborough groups. We hope that this Zoom and YouTube live streaming allows for global participation, contribution, and is in the spirit of inclusivity. We welcome the viewers and listeners from around the world. Should you have problems in not logging on with Zoom, please go on to the YouTube channel. Our objective is aligned to that of the Oxford Center of Hindu Studies, founded in 1997, which is a recognized independent center of the University of Oxford, England. It develops academic programs of education, research, and publishing in Hindu studies. It aims to encourage the Hindu community in the academic study of their own traditions and cultures. Our speaker tonight is Dr. Rameshbhai Pattni, OBE, who has an MPhil from Oxford and is a tutor at the OCHS. He's also a trustee at the Chinmaya Mission. Rameshbhai's biography is remarkable, but most of that's the bit that stands out most about him is that his sheer humility and commitment to his specialism in Hindu thought. In this time of the pandemic, many of us have had reflected and revisited our aspirations. The Bhagavad Gita guides us in many ways. Rameshbhai, in his structured and step-by-step style, will hopefully augment and provide positive aspects from the Bhagavad Gita. Rameshbhai will speak for about an hour or so, 55 minutes, and we'll have a short Q&A and a closing session by Raj Chauhan. For any questions, please send them on chat or on your YouTube, and hopefully we will cover the key areas. Rameshbhai, over to you.
Thank you, Nitin Bhai. Thank you for that introduction. If I can have the screen share now, okay. I think you need to, okay, that's fine. Okay, so welcome, namaste everyone, to this talk on Portrait of Perfection in the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita, of course, is my favorite text in the Hindu scriptures, and I talk about it quite a lot. And I'm going to talk today about various portraits of perfection which are given in the Bhagavad Gita, and talk about what that means to us as individuals in terms of how we can look at these, perceive them, and to understand them to begin to help us in our own lives. And like Nitin Bhai mentioned, that during lockdown, we have to assess a lot of things and somehow to find a vision which keeps us going. And of course, Bhagavad Gita for me is that vision which has kept me going for many, many decades. So let's start by kind of looking at the topics which we are going to talk about today. So Bhagavad Gita, in very brief, the introduction. Perfection. What do we mean by perfection? What does it mean when we say this is perfect or this is perfection? And how can we look at it from the various religious or spiritual point of view? Thirdly, the pathways to perfection. So as we know that Bhagavad Gita has 4 different pathways, which are the pathways of action, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, the path of knowledge, and also ashtanga yoga, or Dhyana Yoga. And these are the pathways to perfection, which lead to a certain understanding of perfection from the Hindu traditional point of view. The means to perfection was that how are we going to get to that perfection, and what are the means by which we are going to get there? And again, to think in terms of the pathways which prescribe a certain way in which we can kind of function in our life at all different levels, including the mind and the body, including our transactions with the world, and then how do we attain that perfection through what is known as sadhana. And then portraits of perfection. I hope to at least give you 4 different portraits depending on the time, but certainly we'll have to look at least 3 of them to show what does it mean when we talk about portrait of perfection from the Bhagavad Gita. And then, of course, lastly, but not the least, is how can these help me individually in terms of my day-to-day transactions in my life and my living. So let's start with the Bhagavad Gita first. And Bhagavad Gita is, of course, considered the most well-known scriptures of the Hindu traditions. Many great thinkers have read it upon it, like Albert Einstein, Mahatma Gandhi, Albert Schweitzer. They have contemplated, deliberated upon the message, as well as given their own kind of understanding of what it means. But it just shows that there is such a depth to the Bhagavad Gita and its philosophy and its practice that it is open to many different perspectives and interpretations. And why does it attract these kind of great thinkers is because it has got this profound message which applies to the whole of humanity. It is regarded, of course, as a part of the integral part of the Mahabharata, which is the greatest epic in the world. It is said to be the longest narrative, as it were, from the Hindu tradition, and has got more than 200,000 verses, which are included there. It was composed by Vyasa at the very beginning of the present age, the Kali Yuga, and according to legend, Ganesha was the scribe who Vyasa dictated to, and he kind of went on writing. Even he had to break off his tusk in order to continue writing, because that was the agreement with Veda Vyasaji. So, tradition of taking Gita as a discrete text by many tradition and teachers, of course, it is embedded in the story and the narrative and the philosophy in the Mahabharata, but it can be seen as a discrete text itself, and many teachers take it, to teach their disciples about the philosophy and the practice contained within these the 700 verses of the Bhagavad Gita. So it appears in the 6th book of the Mahabharata, Bhishma Parvan, in which it's 18 chapters between chapter number 23 and number 40. And of course, it has got various different aspects to it, including very much a political kind of dimension. But besides that, of course, there is the philosophical, the spiritual, the moral, and the ethical, relating to the tension between dharma and moksha, between action and renunciation, between social obligation and spiritual inclination. So these are these various different tensions which we find in the characters and relationship in the Mahabharata between the various characters and actors in this narrative. And we see how that it unfolds itself to explain really how one should live one's life in this way. And then what Bhagavad Gita does is to take this whole narrative, pick up the philosophical principles, pick up all these tensions, and give some practical ways in which this philosophical dimension can be lived in one's life. So it is a very interesting kind of exposition of the narrative itself. So what does then Mahabharata deal with? Mahabharata is really dealing with some very fundamental issues, which, as I was saying, has attracted many great thinkers to contemplate on it. Meaning, purpose, and value of life. So as Nitin, that we have begun to think, really, what is the meaning of life? When we are caught down in this lockdown, which has affected the whole of humanity, what meaning do we make out of? What are the purposes? What are the values of life that we begin to kind of ponder on in order to make sense of these things? Individual identity. What is this person called me? What is this world which I see before me? What is God? All this are again explored very much in the Bhagavad Gita, and coming down to the practical level as to what is my choice? How do I make my choices? How do I act in the world? How do I transact in the world? And what is the nature of these choices and actions which can lead to spiritual perfection? The paths of devotion, knowledge, and yoga. As I was saying, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, all these are different yogas which are there in the Bhagavad Gita. And therefore, it becomes a very comprehensive, practical way in which one can read, reflect, and act on the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. So, after that brief introduction, let me talk about perfection. What is perfection from these various points of view? So, many different views about it. There are many different views about human nature. So if we go and ask somebody from a different tradition, they will have a certain view of human nature. And we also in Hinduism have a certain view of human nature as well. About what human beings essentially are and their proper goal in the universe and their in the universe in which they live. So not only is there a question about who am I, but what am I in relationship to this world which seems to exist in front of me? And what is my relationship to that which can be found beyond this created universe? So Jiva, Jagat, and Ishvara. These are the three kind of aspects which are mainly from the religious point of view, give us different views of human nature and its place in the universe. And there are various different dimensions we can talk about: physical, psychological, moral, relational, ethical, spiritual, etc. And we can think of the spiritual particularly from two major points of view, Eastern and Western. Of course, people can kind of argue about what these terms mean and what is the kind of the politics behind Eastern and Western and thinking in those kind of categories. But just to kind of keep it simple, let's think in terms of Eastern and Western. So Abrahamic traditions, humans are embodied souls born from the material world. Now, as I was saying, this is another view which we are looking at, and particularly from the Abrahamic tradition, such souls have had no previous lives. They may have resurrected existence beyond this life. So you can begin to see the difference between the Hindu tradition and the Abrahamic tradition. Just to give us a flavor in terms of what perfection is. So from the Jewish point of view, what is perfection? And this particular view takes humans as having been created in the image of God. This means being called to be like God and to be God's partner in carrying forward God's work of making just order in the world. And the task of the individual human being really is to hallow life, to raise the worldly world to its highest level. And every act and thought reflects the divine unity of all being. And perfection is attained through the life of the Torah, the ongoing possibility of repentance, and a lot of assistance from the merciful God. So we can see that this is what perfection means. It is embedded in ideas about the individual identity. It is also thinking about God in relationship to the created world, and it points up to a certain purpose to the individual in terms of what they should be doing in order to reach a state of perfection. So from the Hindu tradition, here's the Yoga Sutra way. So as I keep on saying that I passions. One is the Yoga Sutra and the yogic way of thinking and looking at various different things. And the other one is Advaita Vedanta. So just to kind of apologize right at the very beginning that if I kind of focus on these things, it's only because on the one hand, they are my research interest, but also in a sense that those are the things which I myself practice. So it gives me a kind of better insight in terms of what these philosophical concepts mean. So the Yoga Sutra way, it says each human is ultimately seen to be only pure spirit. But a pure spirit or self that is never absorbed in the universal self. Now, this is the difference between Advaita Vedanta and the Yoga Sutra point of view, whereas Vedanta say you can get absorbed in that universal self. Yoga Sutra doesn't talk about that. Experience oneself as being trapped in a real material body filled with all kinds of egoistic desires, which is called prakriti, and causes this constant modification of the mind. So here we are in this body, mind, intellect, which is made up of material, nature, prakriti, and it is full of all these egoistic desires, which needs to be kind of continuously expressed in one's life. And this is how it is being experienced. So spiritual practice, sadhana, is the discipline of the control of the body, the prana, the mind, to reach a state of samadhi. This is the prescription of the Yoga Sutra. It says, you are this trapped in this material body. You need to recognize that you are the pure spirit. How are you going to do that? Through sadhana. It is the discipline and the control of the body and the mind to reach a state of samadhi. And in that state of samadhi, there is a complete stillness of the mind. So Yoga Sutra says, Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga Vritti Nirodha, which means it is the complete cessation of all the modifications in the mind, which means a complete stillness of the mind and the experience of pure spirit of the individual. It's like the consciousness shining like this bright star in a star-filled sky. And this is perfection, which is attained, and it is called Kaivalya, and it is the attainment of liberation as well. So samadhi, with the stillness of the mind, leads us to this perfection, which then is this state of Kaivalya, attainment of liberation, discovering the pure spirit within ourselves. So this is the perfection from the Yoga Sutra point of view. From the Advaita Vedanta point of view, Brahman, the divine self, is the only ultimate reality. The rest is mithya. Mithya means that which is, it is not ultimately real. The apparent existence of each separate individual is superimposed on that ultimate reality. Just like we give the example of the snake on the rope, so that when you're walking in the dark, you may see a kind of snake in front of you. But if you switch on the light, you find that it's only a rope. So this is a superimposition, which Advaita Vedanta talks about a lot. The purpose of life is to realize that ultimate reality, to realize that ultimate truth. And perfection is realization of this truth and attainment of moksha from the cycle of birth and death called samsara. So we can see a slightly different perspective in terms of individual identity. And this individual identity is seen as a kind of superimposition on that ultimate reality. And this superimposition needs to kind of penetrate a two in order to realize that ultimate reality and to realize the purpose, real purpose of life then is then to discover that ultimate reality within ourselves and to know that this reality is the ultimate reality, the oneness of existence. So perfection is the realization of truth. Whereas in Yoga Sutra, we were talking about the state of Kaivalya, that related to attaining the purity of the spirit. So these are the 2 points of view, 3 points of view, which I've said, the Jewish point of view, the Yoga Sutra point of view, the Advaita Vedanta point of view. And of course, it is the idea of perfection is really embedded in terms of the philosophy and the principles which are believed in or not believed in. And this gives rise to a certain way of thinking about perfection and how to achieve that perfection. Okay, so going on to the next thing. Specifically from the point of view of Bhagavad Gita, we can begin to focus on that to see really what are the pathways to perfection and how we can begin to think about not only the means to perfection, but also the portraits of perfection which are given in the Bhagavad Gita. So perfection is what? This is what Bhagavad Gita says in chapter number 620. Yatro paramate chittam niruttam yoga seviya yatra chevatmanatmanam pashyannatmani tushyati. What does it mean? When the mind restrained by the practice of yoga attains quietude, and when seeing the self by the self, he is satisfied in his own self. This is perfection from the yogic point of view. Remember, chapter number 6 is on Dhyana Yoga, which is also Ashtanga Yoga. And this is very much related and runs parallel to the Yoga Sutra as well. And it says here, the perfection is what? Is seeing in the self and being satisfied in the self. This is the picture of perfection from the Yoga Sutra point of view. And going further, Yam labdva chaparam labam manyate nadikam tata yasmin sthito na dukkhena gurunapi cha vichalayati, which means having gained that state, one does not consider any attainment to be greater. This is the perfection. In other words, there's nothing greater to be attained. If you are seeing the self by the self and satisfied in his own self, there's nothing further to do. Having attained this state, one does not consider any attainment to be greater. Being thus established, one is not shaken even in the midst of the greatest calamity. Now, this is what we can begin to think about lockdown. Greatest calamity humanity has seen for centuries. How can one be not shaken? See how practical Bhagavad Gita is. Not to be shaken in the midst of the greatest calamity. Why? Because you have attained this perfection through the practice of yoga, attaining quietude and seeing the self in the self and satisfied in one own self. When you reach that point, nothing can disturb you. So, pathways to perfection. Now, let me kind of just look at the Advaita Vedanta point of view in this case, whereby the way to look at perfection is this ascent into perfection. Remember, I was talking about the perfection according to the Advaita Vedanta point of view is to go beyond this Maya, beyond this delusion of the kind of separateness and the many diverse forms which we are able to perceive in the world. So here's the absolute Brahman, Nirguna Brahman, which is the unmanifest Purusha, slightly different concept from the Purusha of the Yoga Sutra, and imperishable, indefinable, unmanifest, unthinkable, unchangeable, eternal. This is the unmanifest absolute reality called Brahman. Then, because of the effect of Maya, which has got two powers of hiding and projection, what we get is the cosmic creation. And this cosmic creation is seen as Saguna Brahman, which is Ishvara, and manifest Prakriti. In other words, what we see around us is really the creation. Because of the effect of Maya on the unmanifest Purusha, it becomes manifest Prakriti. And we can see the divine vibhutis as this totality of creation, and we can see the Vishvarupa, the kind of cosmic vision of this truth of the unmanifest thing itself as Prakriti. So Advaita Vedanta goes one step further. It says, yes, from the Ishvara, Saguna Brahman, we can have the individual avatar, which begins to kind of be seen as this Rama, Krishna, Shiva. These are now individual avatars, which are also manifestation of which is the and this is manifest Bhagwan, Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma, and all the avatars of Vishnu as well. And the last one then stepping down one step further in terms of how this ultimate reality is manifesting itself. Think of you and me. We are also part and parcel of this way in which we can kind of think about, okay, these are the people who are going to be also as part and parcel of the created universe, jivas who are existing in the, and then the jiva, which is the manifest jiva, is the doer and the enjoyer. Manifest jiva, the doer and the enjoyer, the doer of all the actions and the enjoyer of the consequences of those actions. So here we can see what? We can see that there is a kind of downward descent into the jiva, prakriti, descent into prakriti, into humanity of the avatar, and into humanity as each one of us as individuals. And the reverse direction is, according to Advaita Vedanta, is our intention and purpose in our action. Now is to ascend back into Godhood, to the self, and that is the perfection which we want to achieve. So descent into Prakriti is Jiva's imperfection, and then ascent into Godhood is Jiva's perfection. So Jiva is then continuously kind of got into this imperfection and keeps on going round and round in samsara from one birth to the next, because it has not recognized its inner inherent nature. This is Advaita Vedanta. And Advaita Vedanta then kind of, from the Bhagavad Gita point of view, points out that in order to establish oneself in the truth, jnana nishtha, we need both the intellectual knowledge as well as the experiential knowledge, which then forms as the complete package, as it were, of knowledge itself. And this is unmanifest Brahman. If through meditation you are able to go, that leads you towards liberation. And this is dhyana yoga. It is being established in the knowledge. On there is the manifest Brahman, which is can be said to be upasana of the bhakta, as well as the karma yogi, who is going to take that into account, that the divinity is there. I need to act in a certain way in life, and that becomes my pathway towards perfection as well. So taking this, then attainment of liberation is possible through this kind of process which needs to take place, becoming established in the truth, and therefore attaining liberation through dhyana yoga, through jnana nishtha, upasana of the bhakta, and also karma yoga, in terms of performing our dharma on a day-to-day basis. So these are the pathways to perfection. And of course, Bhagavan does not exclude anybody. A jnani can also have a pathway coming into, even by indirect hearing. It is said that that he can enter into the pathway towards liberation. So here's another way of looking at it. Here's the ego individual, selfish action, acting in ignorance, and is embedded in action, just like Arjun was in the middle of the battlefield, experiencing this crisis because he is questioning himself. What is the truth? Who am I? How am I supposed to function in this particular place? And then to become the seeker, whereby through sadhana, selfless action with devotion and knowledge, then we enter into action in inaction. Inaction from the particular point of view is attaining that highest state of reality and acting with that knowledge that I am not this individual ego identity, but I am that which is the ultimate divine. And going to the person of perfection. So perfection in this case means that we have reached that higher state of consciousness, the consciousness of absolute consciousness, and that is Atman or Brahman. And through this particular pathway, we begin to attain that state of perfection. The first stage is purification through living a life of karma and dharma, and action, knowledge, and devotion become part and parcel of our existence, and realization, so that when the seeker has reached a certain state of purification, then he begins to go towards the ultimate destination through absorption and meditation. And is he able to reach that higher state of realization, and therefore through the spirit of sacrifice, perfection is achieved. So those are the pathways to perfection, and you can see that they're related to the paths of karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, and dhyana yoga, and therefore to then think about what are the means to perfection? What is this thing called sadhana? So, yatha dipo nivatasto nengate sopamasmita yogino yatachittasya yunjanto yogamatmanaha. As a lamp which is placed in a windless place does not flicker, so the yogi with a controlled mind remains steadily absorbed in the self. This is the means. Controlled mind, remaining steadily absorbed, does not even flicker, just like the lamp in a windless place. This is the picture of a yogi in deep meditation, doing sadhana, to attain a state of perfection, absorption in the self as Atman or Brahman. And the aim of all Hindu tradition, of course, is to attain the highest goal, which is moksha. Now, what do we really mean by moksha depends on which tradition you come from. And of course, in the Vedantic tradition, we have got the three major Vedantic traditions of Advaita Vedanta, Vishishta Advaita Vedanta of Ramanujacharya, and of course the Advaita Vedanta of Shankaracharya. So moksha can mean deeply into Krishna consciousness, for example. And if I can achieve that, then that for me becomes a kind of liberation. So reaching moksha is perfection of human life and living. This is what the Hindu tradition talk about. And this is the immediate experience of the divine or the self. It is not something which is intellectual, but it is an immediate experience, not a mediate experience through any of the mind or the intellect. And perfection is achieved through the spiritual discipline of sadhana. So what is sadhana? That by which something is performed. It is a means, and sadhana is the practice through sadhan, which is the means to achieve siddhi, which is perfection. This is how we can talk about sadhana. And perfection is siddhi, so that even the Yoga Sutra talks about, various different types of siddhi, but the ultimate siddhi is really to attain this state of kaivalya, and to reach that state through the method of deep samadhi. So in this case, we can take the example of chanting, and the mantra becomes our sadhan. The mala also becomes the physical sadhan, and we reach a state of intense devotion, which is the siddhi, perfection. Bhakti then becomes the way in which that can be attained. So sadhana, then we can think of as all religious spiritual practices for the attainment of the immediate experience of the divines or the self, depending on the type of tradition about. And the Gita explains and describes various different pathways and stages of the journey towards perfection, and each part has got its own state of perfection. And this is what we're going to look at next. So the portraits of perfection. And there are many different portraits of perfection. And of course, each chapter has got at least one of them. And there are others which are contained in other chapters as well. Sthita Prajna, the one who is established in knowledge. Karma Yogi, who has become established in the way of acting in the right way as a karma yogi, which is described in chapter number 2 and number 3 as well. Karma Sannyasi, chapter number 4 and 5, and Jnana Yogi, which then is kind of running throughout, but also chapter number 2 describes the Sankhya Yoga, and the rest of the chapters kind of elaborate on that as well. The Jnana Yogi, who is, within the realm of knowledge, reflection, meditation, that becomes the way in which Jnana Yogi functions. Atmavid, the knower of Atma. That also is described, and that is one of the ones I'm going to take up later on. Perfect bhakta, chapter number 12, describes the perfect bhakta. And Bhagavan says, this bhakta is the most dearest to me. And it gives a set of qualities, 36 qualities, whereby we can recognize the perfect bhakta as well. Kshetrajna, this is chapter number 13, in which Bhagavan makes the distinction between the field and the knower of the field. And he says the knower of the field is really your true nature. You've got to move towards that and attain perfection through becoming the knower of the field. And gunatit, as you know, the gunas are the elements or the attributes of Prakriti. And the three gunas which we normally talk about, the Rajasic guna, Tamasic guna, and the perfection in this particular context is about going beyond the gunas. Going beyond the gunas means that you're kind of transcending Prakriti, so that transcending Prakriti, you attain a state of gunatit, which is really what that chapter talks about. This is chapter number 14. And also further on, of course, there are various different states, but these are the kind of main ones which we can see clearly in the Bhagavad Gita. So there are quite a few, but really I want to kind of focus on at least 2 or 3 of them. And first of all, let's talk about the sthita prajna, which is very well kind of pointed out in chapter number 2, verse number 55 onwards, right up to verse number 72, 18 verses, which give a picture of perfection of one who is established in the truth, the person of perfection. And here there are 3 elements which we see in chapter number 2, the knowledge aspect, which is Sankhya yoga, which Bhagavan describes, and practice, which is karma yoga, and then the outcome of both practices. So Sankhya yoga, knowledge of the self, from verse number 211 to verse number 230, and the karma yoga, which is the path of action, the practice of karma yoga. And Krsna is actually opening up the whole kind of discussion in chapter number 2, and therefore focuses in these two major pathways, the path of knowledge and the path of karma yoga. And of course, we know that karma yoga is really intertwined with bhakti yoga as well. So we can think of karma yoga, bhakti yoga as one yoga. And then he says, okay, having practiced all this, you come to a state of perfection. And the characteristics of the one who has attained this perfection is given in the final portion of chapter number 2, from 55 onwards to 72, 54 is where Arjuna is asked the question. So here is the kind of general outline about the sthita prajna. So Arjuna is asking, what are the markers of such a person of perfection? How does he speak? How does he sit? How does he walk? He's interested in knowing who is this person of perfection, and how do we kind of recognize this person in our life. So the one who is established in wisdom is the one who has completely given up all selfish desires, is satisfied in the true self by the true self. See, immediately Bhagavan gives kind of way in which one can begin to think about the person of perfection, giving up all selfish desires. Imagine yourself having given up all your desires, and you are satisfied in the self by the self. It is a completely different experience. It is this perfection with up all the desires, whose mind is not shaken by adversity, does not hanker after pleasures in prosperity, is free from attachment, fear, and anger, who is everywhere without attachment with everything, neither rejoices nor grieves, who withdraws his senses from sense objects like a tortoise withdraws all the limbs from all the sides. And he says, whose longing in abstinence lives him on seeing the Supreme. These are some of the verses which are there in chapter number 2. And you can see that, when we think about, am I able to do this? It sounds impossible. Imperfection is really where we are at the moment. And this kind of perfection looks as if, am I really going to achieve this? But of course, this is very much a practical philosophy, and it is. Some people, of course, say that they have attained this state of perfection through following the practices given in the Bhagavad Gita. So, going further, who is awake when all others are? It is night. So when others are sleeping, this person of perfection is awake. And it is night when others are awake. One who really sees, he is the perfect person. He is the Muni. So another very cryptic way of putting the person of perfection. Who has attained peace and remains unmoved when into him all desires enter as waters into the ocean. So imagine, these waters from the rivers are entering the ocean. Ocean is not disturbed. Why? Because it is so vast that it can take anything, remains unmoved. Just like, the person of perfection in this case will not be moved by any adversity. And this is the way in which Bhagavan is describing the sthita prajna. The one who has attained peace, having abandoned all desires, moves about without longing, without I-ness, without minus. And one who has attained the Brahmic state is never again deluded. One can attain this oneness with Brahman even at the end of life if one becomes established in wisdom. So even at the end of life, it is possible to get established in this wisdom, in this knowledge, and to become sthita prajna. So you can see the picture which is being painted here, and it looks absolutely formidable in terms of what it is asking of us in terms of achieving this perfection. But certainly, as I've said, that many people kind of attest to this kind of perfection. So in this chapter, there are three kind of things Lord Krishna mentions. The unsteady, who is full of desires, attachments in me and mine, agitated, no control of senses, no control of the mind, slips down into the ladder of fall, sleeping in ignorance. If somebody was to ask me, I'd say, yeah, that kind of probably describes me, unsteady. And then that's the steady, the one who has started kind of, putting these things into practice, and he begins to have senses and mind under control, controlling desires, attachments, anger, fear, etc., steady in wisdom, able to meditate on the self, and the one who is established, satisfied in the self, by the self, without any desires, free from anger, fear, no I-ness, no minus, equanimity. Samatvam, this is what Bhagavan says again in the Bhagavad Gita, the equanimity of the mind, not disturbed at all. Whatever you throw at him or whatever life throws at him or her remains absolutely steady, in peace and tranquility, awake in the Brahmic state beyond any kind of delusion. So this is the picture of perfection which Bhagavan has given us in chapter number 2. And you can see the kind of way in which perfection is being described. What are the means and pathways towards perfection? And what is the experience of being in that state of perfection? Let's look at another portrait of perfection. This is chapter number 5, Atmavit. And Atmavit really literally means, being the knower of the Atma. So Karma Yoga, the spectrum of sadhak and the realized master is described in chapter number 5. The non-united, unsteady, unbalanced is the karmi, the one who does actions offering to Brahman, abandoning attachment, is not tainted by sin, just as the lotus leaf remains unaffected by water in it. This is now the karma yogi. So the karmi is the ordinary person who has not even stepped on the pathway. Then karma yogi is the one who has stepped on the pathway, beginning to practice, giving up the fruit of the attachment, fruit of action, abandoning attachment, and remains like unaffected, like the lotus leaf in the water. And yogis, having abandoned attachment, perform action merely by the body, intellect, senses, for the purification of the ego. This is the karma sannyasi. And then finally, the knower of Atma is somebody who has completely mentally renounced all action, fully self-controlled, embodied. He rests happily in the 9-gate city, neither acting nor causing others to act. Completely transcended Prakriti. The 9-gate city, of course, is this body. It has got 9 gates. And the Atmavit is kind of staying with this 9-gate city, happily resting in that, but completely beyond. So this is the Atmavid. And here's the kind of spiritual journey which is described in the Bhagavad Gita, from the karmi to the karma yogi, to the karma sannyasi, to the jnana yogi, and then Atmavid. And this is the kind of way in which one steadily is renouncing the fruit of the action and action itself, so that the sense of enjoyership and doership begins to subside and disappear. So in the first part, we have got the Saguna Bhakti. In the next part, we got the Nirguna Upasana or Nirguna Bhakti or Dhyanam, and that takes us to the ultimate destination, which is knowing the Atma, Atmavid, and establishing in the sense of akarta abhokta, not the doer, not the enjoyer. So the one who is the knower of Atma, intellect absorbed in that, their self being in that, established in that, and with that as their supreme goal. Now that means the ultimate reality, that means the Atman. And in this case, Atmavit is the one who is completely absorbed in that consciousness. They go whence there is no return. Once you are there, there is no coming back. And their sins are dispelled by this ultimate knowledge. Then he goes on further to say, who is the knower of Atman Brahman, look with an equal eye upon a Brahmana, endowed with learning and humility, on a cow, on an elephant, even a dog, or even an outcast, whose minds rest in equality, because Brahman is spotless indeed and equal, and therefore they are established in Brahman, resting in Brahman with steady intellect and undeluded, knower of Brahman, neither rejoices on obtaining what is pleasant, nor grieves on obtaining what is unpleasant. So here's the picture, here's the portrait of the one who is established in Atman or Brahman. And the self unattached to external object, he finds happiness in the self, engaged in meditation of Brahman, he attains endless happiness. So if you want to be happy, here are the means, here's the pathway, here's what we got to do. Equal eye. Equal eye is not easy to attain, but this is the pathway to perfection. So he does not rejoice in enjoyments that are born of context, only generators of pain. The impulse born out of desire and anger, if he is able to withstand before death, that is the yogi, he is the happy man, and that one who is happy within, who rejoices within, who is illuminated within, the yogi attains absolute freedom, moksha, himself becoming Brahman. So this is the knower of Brahman. He is the knower of Brahman by becoming Brahman. And that is now the state of absolute freedom, moksha, and this is the Atmavid. So another portrait, and this is the one which I also like, established in devotion, the perfect bhakta. And this Krishna gives in chapter number 12. So who is this bhakta? What is Bhakti Yoga? Bhakti Yoga is, as I mentioned before, the manifest Brahman, which is the created world around us, this whole totality of creation. And this is seen as the body of the divine. When I look at anything in the world, I say to myself, this is manifest Brahman. This is how the bhakta will begin to see and perceive things. And this is Saguna Upasana. And Saguna Upasana means that the manifest Brahman is the one which is the object of one's devotion. And in that case, there are two ways in which one can look at it. Vishvarupa Upasana, which means seeing the totality of creation as the body of God, all in one. That one is the divinity, and everything is kind of contained within this oneness of being. And the other one is Ekarupa Upasana. So Ekarupa Upasana means that you take a certain name and form, like Krishna or Rama, and then devote your Upasana to that one. And not only that, but to extend this, the bhakta will what he'll begin to see the divinity in everyone and everything. So that Ekarupa Upasana means seeing the oneness in all the forms which are perceived through the senses and through the mind. And of course, Karma Yoga, as I said, is associated with this Bhakti Yoga. because in order to devote all my action, dedicate all my action to God, I have to know what God is, and I have to have an intimate relationship with God in this kind of way. So renunciation is about renunciation of the fruit of the action, giving up attachment to the fruit of the action, and also ultimately action itself. So this is how it kind of fits into the whole scheme of the Bhagavad Gita, where Bhakti Yoga becomes part and parcel of Karma Yoga as well, and it is directed towards the object of devotion. So fixing their mind on me, worshipping me, ever steadfast, endowed with supreme faith, these, in my opinion, are the best in yoga. Now, Lord Krishna is mentioning this perfect bhakta here, and he says those who worship the imperishable, the indefinable, etc. This is the ultimate unmanifest Brahman. He says they are also worshippers, and they have to restrain their senses, even-minded everywhere, rejoicing ever in the welfare of all beings. They also come to me. In other words, they also will attain perfection, but the Saguna Upasana, Nirguna Upasana, one of them is not so easy to do. And Lord Krishna himself says that greater is their trouble whose minds are set on the unmanifest. For the goal, the unmanifest, is very hard for the embodied to reach. But those who worship me, manifest form, renouncing all actions to me, regarding me as a supreme goal, meditating on me with a single pointed devotion, yoga, for them whose minds are set on me, very soon I will lift them into and out into myself and out of this ocean of finite experiences called samsara. So here's the methodology, here's the method, here's the technique, here's the sadhana, and how one should kind of practice this in order to achieve this perfection. And what Bhagavan then goes on to say is that Nirguna, of course, he's saying that Nirguna Upasana is very difficult to do. It is much easier to do Saguna Upasana, and therefore that becomes the pathway to perfection. So 36 qualities, as I was saying, of the perfect bhakta, and the one who is dear to Bhagavan in chapter number 12, these are given in verses 13 to 20. He who hates no creature, friendly, compassionate to all, free from all attachment, free from egoism, balanced in pleasure and pain, forgiving, goes on further to say, ever content, steady in meditation, self-control, possessed of firm conviction, with mind and intellect dedicated to me, and goes on further to say, he by whom the world is not agitated. If we see he is there in the company of people, people don't get agitated. And who cannot be agitated by the world, who is free from joy, envy, fear, anxiety, and who is free from wants, pure, alert, unconcerned, untroubled, renouncing all undertakings. And going further, he says, he who neither rejoices, nor hates, nor grieves, nor desires, renouncing good, renouncing evil, same to foe and friend, same in honor and dishonor, same in cold and heat, same in pleasure and pain, who is free from attachment, to whom censure, praise are equal, who is silent, content with anything, homeless. Homeless doesn't mean, living in the street, but homeless in the sense that this home of the body, he does not belong to this body. He is away from there, steady-minded. So you can see he's given a whole kind of list of qualities, 36 qualities, which make up the perfect bhakta. And of course, this has got implication for the devotees, because they begin to practice these things in their day-to-day life to achieve that state of perfection in their bhakti. Okay, I think we got 5 minutes to go through the Gunatit, which is the fourth portrait of perfection, which takes us beyond the gunas. And this is in chapter number 14. So we have seen the Sthita Prajna, we have seen the Atma Vita, we have seen the perfect bhakta, and now we're going to see the one who has transcended the gunas. In other words, he has gone beyond this prakritic embodiment of the body, mind, intellect. So in this chapter, Krishna says to Arjuna, light, sattva, rajas, delusion, tamas. These are the three gunas. When present, he hates not, nor longs for them when they are absent. Even-minded. Again, even-minded is kind of emphasized throughout the Bhagavad Gita. He who seated like one unconcerned, udasin. Udasin is the one who is not concerned. He is in such a state of equanimity and inner peace and calmness, not concerned by anything. Is not moved by the gunas, knowing that the gunas operate, is self-centered, serves not self-centered in the kind of egoistic sense, but centered, centered in the self. And who is not moved by this rajasic energy which all of a sudden can arise, or this delusive energy, this laziness, this kind of heatlessness arising from tamas is not there either. And even light, when it is there, he says, I don't really long for it if it is absent. So here's a picture which is beginning to develop of the Gunatit. So alike in pleasure and pain, dwells in the self, to whom a clod of earth, a precious stone, and gold are alike, to whom dear and not so dear are the same, firm in the way in which he is established in that kind of consciousness, the same in shansha and praise, the same in honor and dishonor, the same to friend and foe, abandoning all undertakings, he is said to have crossed beyond the gunas. So this is now the portrait. And very clear again in terms of the mental reactions, the actions in the world, the kind of perception of the outside world whereby a clod of earth and gold are seen as the same thing. I come from the goldsmith tradition as a Pattni. We are traditionally goldsmith. So, if I say to myself, can I look at gold in a different way from this precious stone or from the clod of earth? Do they look equal to me? Well, equality in this kind of sense, we have to think a bit, what does it really mean? It's not that we think they are valueless, but we kind of acknowledge that the values are different, but in the sense of they are of the same kind of category in which I place all the various things of the world, which is a slightly different concept. So here's the picture of the one who has gone beyond the gunas, and the means of perfection in terms of reaching beyond the gunas is how he kind of summarizes towards the end. He says, serving me with unserving devotion, crossing beyond the gunas, he is fit to become Brahman, and then goes on to say that I am the abode of Brahman, immortal, immutable, everlasting Dharma of absolute bliss. So here's the means. Unswerving devotion on the one hand, and also serving me in the most kind of perfect way. And looking again at the three gunas, here are the three ropes which bind us. And what is required of us is this binding of the imperishable in the perishable, which then results in this ego identity, I am this, me and mine. And what we need to do is to think about what does Bhagavad Gita tell us about releasing ourselves, unbinding ourselves, and transcending beyond the gunas, so that we become perfect in our consciousness beyond the gunas. So this is one way of depicting it. Here's the gunas and their nature. Sattva guna, rajas, and tamas, as I've already mentioned. Luminous, healthy is a sattva guna, and it is binding us through knowledge and happiness. Rajas binds through action. Tamas binds through heedlessness, indolence, and sleep. And in this case, what we have to think about, what the guidance of the Gita is that something is going to bind you. Think about what is the nature of that bondage and how you can begin to release yourself from that kind of bondage. So centered in the self, dwelling in the self, unswerving, unconcerned, non-attachment, aversion to the gunas, equal-minded, samabhava or tulya bhava, according to what we are kind of perceiving in this transactional reality, not initiating any egocentric activity, And in this kind of way, equality of vision, samyaka darshan, the kind of way in which everything is seen horizontalized, as it were, clod of earth and gold, pain and pleasure, friend and foe, dear and not dear, honor and dishonor, censure and praise, all this become kind of equal. One sees with an equal eye. And centered in the self, non-judgmental, non-reactive, non-active. So you can see another very hard kind of benchmark to achieve. Imagine how many judgments we make even in 5 minutes, thousands of judgments. And even as I'm talking, you're making judgment about how I'm speaking and what I'm speaking and whether it's making sense or not. And there is a kind of reaction which is coming. That's fine. Let's kind of think about, this picture of perfection, which is beyond the gunas, which is non-judgmental, non-reactive, non-active. This is the perfected one, beyond the gunas. And in that state, lives serving him and devoted to him. In this case, him is that divine form, whether it is taken as avatar or whether it is taken as the ultimate reality. So finally, how can these help me? And of course, relating to this challenging situation in which we will be out of lockdown very soon. But, this is the sadhana, this is the learning cycle, if you can think about it, is change in belief, attitude, and intention. That is what is required. Change in how we think, how we feel, how we make our choices. And that is the kind of knowledge which is given in the Bhagavad Gita, beliefs, attitude, and intention, how to kind of transform them by listening to this knowledge, by reflecting on this knowledge and thinking about what does it mean, what am I listening to, what am I reading, how can I think about it and make it clear in my mind what it is, and then practicing this knowledge. So listening, reflecting, practicing, listening, reflecting, practicing. This is how the inner transformation is going to take place, with practice and focus, and then inner transformation. So sadhana is really the means of this inner transformation, and that is how it can help me. If I'm willing to engage in this way in which the Bhagavad Gita is talking about these various different ways of perfection, I can take any one of them and say, okay, I'm going to move towards perfection in this particular area because that is what attracts me, whether it's bhakti or jnana or karma or whatever it is. I begin to focus on that, and that becomes my route to inner transformation. So this way, we can think about, the karma yoga, because this is what we are engaged in day-to-day life, transaction, making choices, doing things. So karma yoga is not non-performance of actions. It is not mere renunciation. It is not forced inaction with mind wandering all over the place. What karma yoga is excellence in action, controlling the senses by the mind, mechanism of the ego operating system that can be overcome and requires an aware and alert mind, and also not suppressing, repressing, but sublimating the desires towards higher, nobler purposes. This is what karma yoga is. And conservation of energy, which means the energy is focused, it is taking us in a particular direction. So controlling the senses by the mind, chapter number 3, verse number 7, selfless action in the world, moves away from the wrong fields of action, moves into the right field of action with right belief, attitude, intention, without attachment, and desensitize to likes and dislikes. Equanimity, again, by desensitization of likes and dislikes, equal-minded to the result of action. And this is also important for us as people living in an active world, to kind of think about what is our reaction when we get the result of our action. Does it annoy us? Does it make us depressed? What does it do? Here, the indication is equal-minded to all the results of action. So, karma bhogi mithyachari karma yogi. This is being pointed out in the Bhagavad Gita. Karma yogi is the one who is kind of operating from the ego, full of selfish desires and full of likes and dislikes, subject to the ego emotion of greed, anger, etc., in a state of ignorance of the truth, Mithyachari is outwardly controlling, but inwardly in a total kind of chaotic situation, inwardly having desires, entertaining likes and dislikes, subject to ego emotion of greed, anger, etc. And the karma yogi then becomes the one who is controlling the senses by the mind, selfless action in the world, without attachment to fruit of action, diminished sense of me and mine, and diminished ego emotion like kama, krodha, lobha, moha, mada, matsarya. These are the ego emotion of kama, krodha. The person who doesn't kind of get angry remains equanimous in all conditions. This is the karma yogi and moves towards perfection through this kind of method. So therefore, Bhagavan is telling Arjuna, perform your bounden duty. Action is superior to inaction. And 4 groups of karma which we need to think about in our own lives. Nitya karma, all the duties done according to role and stage of life. Naimittika karma, which is duties for special occasion. Kamya karma, special rituals for acquisition. Nishiddha karma, immoral, undivine, forbidden actions. So thinking what action we are doing and thinking about what is the right and what is the wrong thing to do, and really speaking to then consider what we need to do. So I have kind of talked about the Bhagavad Gita, perfection, what it is from 3 different perspectives, from the Jewish perspective, from the Yoga Sutra perspective, from the Advaita Vedanta point of view, and the means to perfection. What is sadhana? And how do we kind of think about sadhana in terms of our daily existence and the pathways to perfection? What are the different pathways which are indicated in the Bhagavad Gita? And then to look at individual portraits of perfection. We looked at the sthita prajna, we looked at the atma, we looked at the bhakta, and we looked at the gunatit. So all these are kind of, portraits of perfection which we looked at. And then thank you so much. This brings me to the end of this talk. So I will stop sharing. And shall I hand over to Nitin Bhai? Okay.
Hi, can you hear me? Thank you. Rameshbhai, this was excellent. In fact, I've just been watching all these questions, and it's just mind-blowing how you've dissected the Bhagavad Gita in so many different ways. And ultimately, the objective of all of us, and I hope everybody, is that we want to achieve that situation of the lotus, the perfection, the trying to cope with all the stresses and things of everyday life, and see how we can actually manage and cope in a practical manner. And you've shown really lovely ways. I can quote one person who's Subrata Day, who has just said that, I must say that this is probably the best talk on the Gita that I've ever listened to. Such incisive dissection of the treasures in the Gita. Thank you, Sri Rameshbhai. So I'm going to actually ask you some of the questions that we've had. Perhaps I'll start off with Subrata De directly. He said that, is it right to say that in the Bhagavad Gita, the need for self-effort supersedes the imparting of grace in order to reach perfection, whereas the Abrahamic traditions rely more on grace?
I don't think it's strictly true to say. I think that all religions kind of talk about grace, but they talk about grace in different ways. And I guess that even in the Hindu traditions, when we talk about Vedanta, for example, we can talk about Vedanta in many different ways. We can talk about the way in which Advaita Vedanta of Madhvacharya is talked about, which really relies on grace. And grace and surrender, Sharanagati, becomes so important in terms of the practice of spirituality. So, one needs to kind of differentiate between the different traditions, their kind of definition of grace, their, way of looking at grace as part and parcel of their spiritual existence, and how it relates to their spiritual journey. So, for example, comparing, the Advaita Vedanta to the Advaita Vedanta talks much more about being in practice, and especially about the control of the mind, control of the senses through listening and reflection and so on, so that it becomes a very much a kind of individual purusharth, the effort which needs to be put to reach that higher state of consciousness. And the idea of grace here is slightly different. What Advaita Vedanta talks about grace is saying that I have to kind of open myself up to the grace, which is ever flowing and ever present. And if I open myself up to grace through the purification and the stillness of the mind, I can experience that grace. And when that grace starts flowing in one's life, then it accelerates the process of inner transformation. So you can see there are different ways of looking at grace from different points of view. And of course, we have to kind of make that distinction as well.
Thank you. There's a question from Jyoti Patel. Once Kaivalya is reached, does one remain in this state permanently?
Yes, so the state of Kaivalya, we can look at it from 2 points of view. One is that, Yoga Sutra talks about the Savikalpa Samadhi, Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And what happens is that the first 4 stages of Samadhi take us to a certain point whereby there is still that kind of practice of being in that consciousness, which is a relative consciousness which relates to a subject-object duality. When we go into the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, then there is the continuous experience of that consciousness, which is the pure consciousness of the Purusha. Now, Samadhi is still practice. And we have to go again and again to that state of Samadhi in order to experience that again and again until the time when we become established in it. And once that establishment takes place, then there is no return. So Kaivalya is really that state which is attained through the practice of Samadhi. Once one becomes established in that, then there is kind of no return. Just like in the Bhagavad Gita, it says it is a one-way street. Once you get there, there is no coming back. In other words, once the delusion is gone, it is gone forever. Or if the consciousness has become pure in terms of, my divine relationship, my relationship to the divine through my consciousness, then there is kind of very little chance of slipping back.
Thank you. There's another one from Urmila Sharma-Valand. How is the self different from the Nirvana Shaktam as referred to by Sri Adi Shankaracharya, Shivoham?
Yes.
And she's a little confused about that.
Okay. So Nirvana Shatkam are the 8 verses which describe the state of being in that pure consciousness. Nirvana Shatkam is a composition by Adi Shankaracharya, and it talks about the self. If I'm located in that pure self, which is Atman, which is Brahman, and it is described as the self as the ultimate existence. It's not this individual self which we normally talk about, you and me. So that self is that ultimate self, which is the same as Atman, which is the same as Brahman. So Mano Buddhi Chitta Ahankar Chittani Naham. It says that I am not this body, I'm not this mind, I'm not this intellect, I'm not this senses, I'm nothing this which I'm normally identified with. Nor am I the Shishya, nor am I the Guru, nor am I anything of this sort, which is related to the transactional world of this relative reality. When I have surpassed all this, and when I have transcended all this into pure consciousness of the self, none of these things apply to me.
Thank you.
So this is what Nirvana Shatkam is actually describing, that higher state of consciousness.
Thank you. There's another one from Abhijit Mandal. Why are the arrows bidirectional in the chart about the 3 sections of chapter 2?
So I'm kind of trying to think about which arrows you're referring to, but I guess you're talking about the knowledge and the action. Is that what you're talking about, Abhijit? Anyway, I don't know whether you can hear that or not.
Can't actually.
Okay, but really, basically, it means that there is a kind of interaction, mutual interaction between knowledge and action. So that when we talk about practice, practice has to refer to knowledge, and knowledge has to refer to the action, and action has to kind of go into the state of perfection. So therefore, that until this mutual interchange between knowledge, in other words, theory and practice, they have to be interrelated. There cannot be a kind of one-way arrow towards practice. But it means that once I have practiced, I can go back to the theory and check it out whether I'm still functioning according to what the theory was telling me. So that's why it's bidirectional.
Thank you. And finally, I'm going to take this last one. It's from Pasha. What is the meaning of sinful actions in the Bhagavad Gita specifically and Hinduism in general?
Okay, so yes.
Sorry, the question carries on. My understanding is the Abrahamic one, where sinful actions means actions that are forbidden by God, and performing it will incur punishment from God.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me give you the way in which Advaita Vedanta talks about it. So there's punya and papa. Papa is said to be sinful action, and punya is said to be meritorious action. Now, in terms of comparison with the Abrahamic religion, it's for example, if we talk about the Ten Commandments, or we say the word of God, and we are kind of going against that, then that becomes a sinful action. In this case, what we are talking about is that anything which is locating us in our sense of ego and ego identity and takes us towards this ego individuality, selfishness. Selfishness is equal to sinful action. Anything which is done from a selfish point of view is a sinful action. Why is it sinful? Because as soon as I do papa, it binds me to this cycle of birth and death, because it is generating two things. It is generating more karma, and it is generating more vasana. And as long as these are being generated because I'm moving in the wrong direction into selfish way of behaving, then it generates those karma and vasana, and therefore it binds me to this cycle of birth and death. And therefore, papa means anything which I do on the basis of my ego identity. Punya means that which is selfless, which I do without any concern about my own desire, but it is related to my dharma. Dharma means that I'm going towards punya, and therefore it will take me towards liberation. Direction, it will be taking me towards bondage and the cycle of birth and death.
Thank you. That's a beautiful answer. Beautiful answer. Just one final one through a second demand. It's from Pradeep Vasudevan. How has Buddhist teachings influenced the Bhagavad Gita?
Well, I would say it is probably the other way around. Is that, if you think about Bhagavad Gita as pre-existing Buddhism, then we are talking about, Buddhism maybe being influenced by Bhagavad Gita rather than the other way around. We are talking about Bhagavad Gita, and, of course, there are various different locations in terms of time. Is that when was the Bhagavad Gita actually written? So if we are talking about between 4,000 to 7,000 years, then it is very far from the Buddhist philosophy and the birth of Buddhism. So I guess that to me it sounds as if the influence is the other way around, rather than Buddhist philosophy influencing the Bhagavad Gita. Of course, one can think about, how would a Buddhist read the Bhagavad Gita, and interpret it in their own kind of philosophical context. That is a different question altogether.
Thank you, Rameshbhai. Rameshbhai, I'm going to pass you on now on to the eminent Raj Chauhan, who is kind of looking very distinguished with his beard, and he's been reflecting a lot through this period of COVID and all that. And he's going to talk about some really important elements that a lot of these things that we do learn from the OCHS and from eminent people like yourselves is because of to ensure that we have got a sustainable system that actually makes sure that this knowledge is actually passed to as many people as possible. And Raj will probably go on to detail and how we can make it even more sustainable. Thank you, Raj.
Thank you, Nitin Bhai. And as usual, Ramesh Bhai, absolutely fantastic. And really loved it. And as always, I managed to just hang on to one or two words of yours. And throughout this, I was looking at the two words that you used. One is sadhan and the other is sadhana. We have one, but not the other as much. And I think this is the issue we have. Sadhan is there, and this is one of the things why the OCHS and the whole institution really inspires me, because you don't need to read huge volumes and books. Even the smallest word can really make an impact. It is how you apply that word. Yeah, and this is what I actually got from you. So with that in mind, for people who joined us today, we've had a really good turnout today, which I'm again enthused that we might have issues going on to YouTube from just the Zoom, but I think looking at it collectively, we had numbers reaching around 140 to 150 people, which is great. And we had around 80, 90 people on YouTube. So perhaps in future, I think we could encourage working on that platform a bit more. And it will also be available for people who might not have been able to join us. So coming back to the sadhan, that sadhan word is OCHS to me encompassed as the whole real book where we can go in. And this is where I feel that we are instrumental in bringing people of your caliber with so much knowledge to the people who might not necessarily be able to access you otherwise. And I believe by the French group promoting these talks through various mediums to various people and having quality speakers like yourself, we are then doing the sadhana of helping you or people like that being able to access yourselves. So that is that on the two words from me. What I'd like to focus on are a couple of points at the beginning of the talk today. We put in some certain slides. And for people who actually don't know, the whole object of the Friends group was to create awareness of the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies and also help raise funds to promote the work that the Oxford Center does, the research, the development of bringing a lot of these lectures and other books and valuable scriptures to the fore, and where people can then have access to these. So with that in mind, we are now trying to put in a lot of different types of, conventionally we were doing it locally on a face-to-face basis, where we were launching a scheme of sponsor this or sponsor that. But if you look at, you'll have a chance through the YouTube to be able to go back and look at some of these sponsorships. And one of the most significant ones we've thought of this year, and it's totally happened just out of the blue, where we feel that the type of courses that are available from the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, the online courses are, yes, immediately available to people now, but we are looking at a more of a legacy long term, that once a lecture of a caliber is created, it will be there for posterity. And people who, our children, our grandchildren, and their children will have access to the knowledge that you have put so much into gathering and deciphering and making it accessible to people who would not normally be in a position to access these. So with that in mind, we have now created a new campaign called Sponsor the Development of an Online Course. Now that's quite a major thing. Each of these courses, people think, okay, it's taken them an afternoon to create. It doesn't. There's research, there's development, there's photography, there's the critique. There's so many elements to it to be able to then polish it and bring it to the people. And the cost of that is around between 7,000 and 10,000 on an average from what and that's a realistic budget. So with that in mind, we have launched the scheme of taking on the very first project. And we are really grateful because through the medium of the Friends group and the last talk, we have kick-started this sponsorship, and we have generously been donated £201 to kickstart it by Mr. Rajan Bhai of the Coventry Friends. And our target would be to, within this very next 12 months, will be to at least, if not more than one, I'm hoping that we will at least definitely 100% achieve the target of achieving to complete production and development of one new course and perhaps build on that. So that is one of the things I'd like people to actually try and get into, saying, okay, we believe in Vidyadan. And there is no richer giving than to do this and leave it as part of your legacy, that it will be there for future generations to come. The second one is a straightforward one. If you like what we do, if you're inspired, become a friend of the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies. And becoming a friend is simple. I am a friend, you are a friend, Nitin Bhai is a friend, all of us are friends. And all we are doing is to coming together and contribute in whatever capacity to the center so that more and more work can be processed quicker. As you know, the center needs funding and we are trying to do our best to help it to achieve more and more goals. So become a friend if you can, and sponsor us, donate a small amount on an ongoing basis. And it doesn't have to be a large amount. A cup of coffee equivalent to a week is sufficient, or a month, entirely up to you. If you don't drink coffee, we'll take your money for the tea as well. So that's fine. Regarding the monthly talks, the hosting of something like this is not a major cost, but conventionally when we used to do it at various venues, we used to ask people to contribute a small amount so that it can take the necessary small costs that are involved. And the cost of that is around £200. And should you be inspired, please get in touch with Manish. His full email is on one of the slides. And the other biggest thing which we do annually, which we've been doing for quite a number of years, is, and this is something not just through the OCHS, I have actually always lived this. And there is a testament that people will vouch for this. My guru said, sponsor a student, change one person's life, if you can. And this is why the sponsor a student came along, and we felt as a friends group that it was a worthwhile course to do, is to just alleviate some of the financial issues of a student annually. And it's not a large sum of money by any standards, but it is something that we felt if everybody contributed a very small amount to just sponsoring a student, the target of that is £1,008. And that money is goes directly without any admin costs or anything to a worthy student. And in the last interview when we had with the student, and we asked him saying, we got a very nice letter saying, thank you so much for the generous donation. We asked him, what did it actually do? And the simple reply was, it says he put food on the table. So sometimes we don't understand how critical that amount of money is. Sorry. So with that in mind, please sponsor a student. And the other thing is there is a link on there where it says stay connected. As far as the GDPR rules are applied, we need you to approach us to be able to continue sending you more and more information regarding all our future events and other events. So please, if you haven't emailed us already, please drop an email through the chat box or directly to the email link is on there, the Leicester Friends of Oxford Centre for Indo Studies. Other than that, yes, I hope you benefit from lectures like this. And if you feel inspired, please support the work of the center and really spread the word, and so that more and more people benefit through the quality lectures like this. Thank you. And thank you to everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much, Raj, and thank you so much, Rameshbhai. There have been amazing comments, and I hope we can keep this going on. I just want to remind you that we will be moving over to the YouTube channel exclusively from next month. Do join us on the OCHS YouTube channel. We will send you the information. It's on the chat group already, but if you can make sure that you remember that it will be exclusively on the YouTube channel. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys all have a nice of the bits that we've learned. This will be obviously available. I couldn't help taking pictures of some of the wonderful slides that Rameshbhai has done. And again, can't thank you enough. Thank you. Bless you. Take care. Bye-bye.